My rich in-laws insulted my small coffee shop, unaware I owned their favorite elite cafe. The morning light filtered through the windows of Brewer's Nook, casting a warm glow over the worn wooden floors. I wiped down the counter for the third time that hour when the bell above the door chimed. My heart sank as I recognized the distinctive clip of Margaret Holloway's designer heels. "Sophia, darling," my mother-in-law's voice carried that artificial sweetness that always preceded her cruelest comments. "Still playing with your little hobby, I see." I forced a smile. "Good morning, Margaret. William, what brings you by?" My father-in-law didn't bother removing his sunglasses as he glanced around with thinly veiled disdain. "We were in the neighborhood. Thought we'd see if Daniel's charity project was still limping along." Charity project. That's what they called my dream, the business I'd built with my own hands. To the Holloways, Brewer's Nook was just another embarrassing endeavor their son's wife had stumbled into. "Coffee," I offered, already knowing their answer. "No, thank you," Margaret said, waving dismissively. "We've just come from La Royale." Now that's real coffee. La Royale. Their favorite topic and the gold standard against which my humble shop was always measured and found wanting. "You should taste their new Ethiopian blend," William added, running his finger along one of my shelves and checking for dust. "Simply divine. But I suppose that's the difference between a proper establishment and a..." He gestured vaguely. "Street corner business." I bit my tongue, the familiar taste of blood and restraint. If only they knew. "Daniel should really talk some sense into you," Margaret continued, settling uninvited at one of my tables. "A woman of your age, playing barista. It's beneath the Holloway name." The Holloway name. As if I had married Daniel for his family's social standing rather than for love. "Business is actually quite good," I said. "We've had a 15% increase in regular customers this quarter." William let out a laugh that was more of a bark. 15% of nothing is still nothing, my dear." The bell chimed again, and I felt relief as my assistant manager, Zoe, walked in. Young, vibrant, with blue-streaked hair and piercings, she was everything they disapproved of. "Morning, boss," she called cheerfully, then stopped short. "Oh, sorry. Didn't realize we had guests." "Just family," I said with a hint of irony. "Zoe, could you start on the morning prep? I'll be there in a minute." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she observed Zoe's tattoos. "This is the sort of staff you employ? No wonder you're struggling." Zoe has a master's degree in business and makes the best latte art in the city. I defended, my voice sharper than intended. "Art," William scoffed. "Coffee isn't about art, Sophia. It's about quality, ambience, exclusivity. That's what La Royale understands." The irony made my chest tighten. I turned away, pretending to organize cups, hiding the flush of anger creeping up my neck. "We saw Daniel for dinner last night," Margaret said. "He mentioned you weren't there because you were working late." Again. In their world, women who married into wealth weren't supposed to work at all. We were meant to be decorative, supportive, available. "The shop needed inventory," I explained. "Daniel understands." "Daniel is too kind," Margaret replied. "He deserves a wife who's present, not one who smells of coffee beans and minimum wage." A group of college students filed in, bringing laughter that felt like oxygen in the suffocating presence of the Holloways. "Well, we should be going," William announced. "We have lunch at the club with the Andersons. You remember Richard Anderson? His daughter just got accepted to Yale. Pre-law." Another dig. My decision to drop out of law school for coffee had been the first in a long line of disappointments I'd delivered to the Holloway family. As they prepared to leave, Margaret paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. We're hosting a dinner party next Saturday. Daniel's already confirmed you'll both attend." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Do you try to wear something appropriate? The Blakemores will be there, and you know how Cynthia notices these things." Before I could protest, they were gone, leaving the lingering scent of Margaret's expensive perfume and the familiar weight of their disapproval. Zoe emerged from the back. "Those were the famous in-laws, huh?" I nodded, exhaling slowly. "In all their glory. They seem intense." That was actually them on their best behavior, I said with a hollow laugh. As I prepared the students' orders, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Mom just called. Sorry they ambushed you. Still on for dinner tonight? I texted back a quick yes. Daniel was the one bright spot in my relationship with the Holloways. He never made me feel like I had to choose between my dream and his family's approval. He understood why I needed Brewer's Nook to be mine alone, even if he didn't know all my secrets. Later, as the afternoon rush died down, I retreated to my tiny office. Hidden behind a stack of invoices was a sleek black folder emblazoned with a gold crown, the logo of La Royale. I opened it, reviewing the previous month's profits, which were, as usual, exceptional. The Holloways had no idea that their precious La Royale, the epitome of coffee sophistication, was mine. All mine. And one day, they would know just how wrong they had been about the barista who wasn't good enough for their son. But not yet. For now, I would endure their insults, their condescension. Because revenge, like a properly brewed espresso, was best served at precisely the right moment, hot, intense, and utterly unforgettable. Few people knew that before Brewer's Nook, there was La Royale. 5 years ago, I stood in an empty storefront in the fashionable west end of the city, my savings account nearly drained, a business plan clutched in my hands. The building's previous tenant, a high-end chocolatier, had left behind marble countertops and elegant light fixtures. As I walked across the Italian tile floors, I could envision what this space could become. "Are you sure about this, Sophia?" my friend and business advisor, Elena, had asked. "This is a significant investment. The rent alone." "I'm sure," I'd replied, watching sunlight stream through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This is exactly what I've been looking for. I hadn't met Daniel yet, hadn't encountered the Holloways and their world of social hierarchies and carefully maintained appearances. Back then, I was just Sophia Bennett, a law school dropout with a vision and an inheritance from my grandmother burning a hole in my pocket. La Royale opened 3 months later to immediate acclaim. I'd hired a brilliant head barista from Seattle, sourced beans directly from small farms in Colombia and Ethiopia, and designed a space that made people feel important just by walking through the door. The business press called it revolutionary and the new standard in coffee culture. Within 6 months, we had lines out the door every morning. That was when I met Daniel. He came in one rainy Tuesday, ordered a simple black coffee, and struck up a conversation about the pour-over technique my barista was demonstrating. I liked his unpretentious nature, his genuine interest in coffee beyond its status value. When he asked me to dinner, I said yes without hesitation. It wasn't until our third date that I learned he was Daniel Holloway of those Holloways, banking, real estate, old money stretching back generations. By then, it was too late. I was already falling for him. "My parents can be difficult," he'd warned me, twisting his napkin nervously. "They have certain expectations." I'd laughed it off. "I own a successful business. Surely they can't object to that." Daniel's silence should have been my first clue. When we got engaged 6 months later, I made a fateful decision. I would introduce Daniel's parents to La Royale, but not as its owner. Instead, I hired a manager to be the public face of the business, Valerie, a poised former hospitality executive with impeccable credentials and the kind of polished demeanor that would impress the Holloways. "Why this secrecy?" Daniel had asked when I explained my plan. "You've built something amazing. They should know." I couldn't articulate my reasoning then. It was instinct, a protective measure born from those early awkward dinners with his parents, where they scrutinized everything from my table manners to my education. "I just want them to experience the cafe without bias," I'd said. "Let's see if they actually like it on its own merits." They did. More than like it, they became La Royale's most vocal ambassadors. The only place in this city that understands what real coffee should be, I'd overheard Margaret telling her friends at our wedding reception. By then, my role as silent owner was firmly established. Valerie handled the day-to-day operations and public relations. I remained in the background, making all major decisions, but keeping my name off official documents through a carefully structured LLC. Only Daniel, Valerie, and my lawyer knew the truth. When I decided to open Brewer's Nook 2 years ago, Daniel was concerned. Won't it compete with La Royale? He'd asked as we toured the modest storefront I was considering. Not at all, I'd explained. La Royale is about exclusivity and luxury. Brewer's Nook will be about community and accessibility. Different clientele, different experience. And different price points, he'd added with a smile. What I didn't tell him was that Brewer's Nook was my rebellion against the Holloway world I'd been absorbed into. A place where I could be myself without pretense, where I could experiment with new ideas without risking the La Royale brand. Most importantly, it was a place where I didn't have to hide behind managers and corporate structures. Now, sitting in my cramped office at Brewer's Nook, I reviewed La Royale's latest financial statements. Revenue was up 22% from the previous year. The new pastry chef I'd hired was drawing rave reviews. The exclusive single-origin subscription service had a 6-month waiting list. My phone rang. Valerie. The Holloways were in again today, she said without preamble. Mrs. Holloway asked about the possibility of hosting her garden club's annual luncheon in our private room. I suppressed a laugh. What did you tell her? That we're booked solid for the next 3 months, but I'd put her on the priority list. Valerie's voice held a note of amusement. She also mentioned her daughter-in-law runs some little coffee place and asked if we'd consider hiring her if her shop fails. The audacity was breathtaking. Did she now? She said you might benefit from seeing how a real coffee establishment operates. I closed my eyes, letting the insult wash over me. Thank you for handling it, Val. After hanging up, I stared at the financial report spread before me. La Royale, the sophisticated, exclusive cafe that Margaret and William Holloway believed represented everything I wasn't, generated enough profit in a single month to cover Brewer's Nook's expenses for a year. Someday, the truth would come out. But not yet. For now, I would continue my double life. The struggling shop owner enduring her in-laws' condescension by day. The successful entrepreneur behind their favorite status symbol by night. The secret was becoming harder to keep. But the look on their faces when they finally learned the truth, that would be worth every moment of this elaborate charade. Saturday morning brought unexpected rain, turning what should have been a busy weekend rush at Brewer's Nook into a quiet, dreary affair. I was arranging a display of locally made honey when the bell above the door jangled. To my surprise, not just Margaret and William walked in, but Daniel's sister Victoria and her husband James trailed behind them, the full Holloway entourage. We were just passing by, Margaret announced, shaking water droplets from her designer umbrella. Her gaze swept across the nearly empty cafe with poorly concealed satisfaction. Slow day. The rain, I explained, straightening up. What brings all of you here? My eyes found Daniel's, who looked apologetic. He hadn't mentioned his family, was planning a visit. Mother insisted, Victoria said, removing her cashmere gloves. Unlike her parents, Victoria had always been civil to me, if a bit distant. They wanted to show James your establishment. James, who had married into the Holloway family just last year, nodded awkwardly. I recognized the look on his face, the same bewildered politeness I'd once worn when first navigating the family dynamics. Well, welcome, I said, gesturing to my best table. Please sit down. I'll bring you some coffee. Actually, William interjected, we thought we'd order properly. Give this place a fair assessment. My skin prickled at his tone, but I maintained my professional smile. Of course. What would you like? They approached the counter, examining the menu board as if inspecting evidence at a crime scene. Margaret's nose wrinkled as she read the descriptions of our house blends. No single origin options? She asked, her voice carrying through the quiet cafe. We rotate our single origins weekly, I explained, pointing to the smaller chalkboard where today's special was listed. Currently featuring a Guatemalan from the Huehuetenango region. William snorted. La Royale offers at least 5 single origins daily. Different business models, I replied evenly. What can I get started for you? They placed their orders with exaggerated precision. A dry cappuccino for Margaret, with actual microfoam, not just frothed milk. An Americano for William, extracted for exactly 27 seconds, not a moment longer. A latte for Victoria, and a simple drip coffee for James. As I prepared their drinks, the Holloways made no effort to lower their voices as they discussed the cafe's shortcomings. "The seating is so pedestrian," Margaret remarked. "Those chairs can't possibly be comfortable." "And the lighting," William added. "Too bright for proper coffee appreciation." Victoria made a noncommittal hum, while James remained silent, examining a local art piece hanging on the wall with genuine interest. I delivered their drinks on a tray, each served in our handmade ceramic mugs from a local potter. "The presentation is certainly rustic," Margaret said, lifting her cappuccino and dramatically sniffing it. Her nose wrinkled. "Mediocre at best. The milk is oversteamed." I had personally prepared her drink with the same care I gave every order. The microfoam was perfect, silky and glossy, with a temperature of exactly 145 degrees. William took a sip of his Americano and grimaced theatrically. "Too bitter. I suspect the water temperature was off." He set the cup down with finality. "Extraction is a science, Sophia. Not something to be approached casually." My face burned as a few regular customers glanced our way. Zoe, working the register, shot me a concerned look. "I'm sorry it's not to your liking," I said, my voice tight. "Would you like me to remake it?" "Don't bother," William said with a dismissive wave. "Some flaws can't be fixed with a second attempt." Victoria at least had the decency to look embarrassed, taking a small sip of her latte. "It's fine, actually," she murmured. "You're too kind, dear." Margaret patted her daughter's hand. "No need to spare feelings." Daniel, who had been observing silently, finally spoke up. "I think Sophia's coffee is excellent. Loyalty is admirable, son," William said with an indulgent smile. "But objective quality is objective quality." The conversation shifted as they began comparing Brewer's Nook to La Royale in excruciating detail: the inferior beans, the basic equipment, the ordinary clientele. Each comparison was delivered as though they were merely stating obvious facts rather than deliberately insulting my livelihood in my own establishment. "The problem," William announced, warming to his topic, "is a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes exceptional coffee. La Royale understands that coffee is an experience, not just a beverage. Their Ethiopian blend," Margaret added, "has notes of blueberry and dark chocolate that simply transcend what's possible in a place like this." I bit my tongue. That Ethiopian blend had been my creation. I'd spent months working directly with a small cooperative in Yirgacheffe to develop it exclusively for La Royale. The final blow came when a young barista in training accidentally spilled water while refilling their glasses. William's face contorted in disgust as a few drops landed on his sleeve. "This is exactly what I mean," he said loudly. "Unprofessional. Completely untrained." The girl, barely 18, mumbled apologies as she frantically mopped up the spill. "It's fine, Amy," I assured her. "Accidents happen." William wasn't finished. He leaned toward me, lowering his voice but not enough to prevent nearby tables from hearing. "You should quit this nonsense and work at La Royale. Maybe then you'd learn to serve real coffee." The shop fell silent. Even the soft background music seemed to fade away in the wake of his words. "I think we've seen enough," Margaret announced, standing. "Daniel, are you coming?" My husband hesitated, caught between family loyalty and supporting me. "I'll catch up with you," he finally said. "I want to talk to Sophia." As they gathered their things, William dropped a final verbal grenade. "You know, I've told Valerie at La Royale about your little shop. She agreed to consider giving you some pointers. Professional courtesy, and all that." They swept out the door, leaving behind untouched drinks and the suffocating weight of their contempt. Only James paused, turning back to quietly say, "For what it's worth, my coffee was perfect." The door closed behind them, the cheerful bell a jarring counterpoint to the humiliation burning in my chest. Daniel approached the counter, his face pained. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were planning to do this." I held up my hand, stopping his apology. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or family dynamics anymore. This was about respect for my work, my passion, my dreams. The time for my secret was drawing closer, but not quite yet. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, interrupting my inventory count at Brewer's Nook. Valerie's name flashed on my screen, unusual for her to call during peak business hours. "We have a situation," she said without preamble, her normally composed voice tense. "Your in-laws are here. Again." I closed my eyes. What happened? It started with a complaint about the temperature of Mrs. Holloway's cappuccino. When Alejandro offered to remake it, Mr. Holloway said he shouldn't have to ask for basic competence. Valerie's voice lowered. Then they demanded to speak to the owner. My pulse quickened. "What did you tell them?" "The usual. That the owner prefers to remain anonymous, and I'm authorized to handle all issues." She paused. They didn't take it well. I heard commotion in the background, raised voices, the clatter of dishes. "They're still there?" "In the private lounge," Valerie confirmed. "They've been here for over 2 hours, monopolizing our best table. 3 customers have already left because of the noise." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already reaching for my coat. "There's more," Valerie added quickly. "They're demanding VIP membership cards." La Royale didn't have a VIP program. I had always insisted on treating all customers equally, regardless of their status or wealth. This was precisely the kind of entitlement I had established the cafe to resist. What exactly did they say? Valerie's hesitation spoke volumes. Mrs. Holloway suggested that La Royale should recognize its most valuable patrons with special privileges, priority seating, complimentary upgrades, after-hours access. When I explained we don't offer such services, Mr. Holloway implied he has connections at the city's licensing department who would be very interested in reviewing our permits. A threat, veiled but unmistakable. Anger flared hot and sudden in my chest. Mr. Holloway also mentioned, Valerie continued, her voice now carefully neutral, that his daughter-in-law runs a failing coffee shop and suggested we hire her to teach her what quality means. He said, and I quote, "We're doing you a favor by patronizing your establishment. The least you can do is accommodate our reasonable requests." I had endured their thinly veiled insults for years, absorbed their condescension with gritted teeth and forced smiles. But threatening my business, my real business, the one I had built from nothing, crossed a line. "I'm on my way," I said. "Don't give them anything. If they leave before I arrive, call me immediately." When I arrived at La Royale 15 minutes later, I entered through the back door and slipped into my rarely used private office. Through the one-way glass partition, I could observe the main floor without being seen. The Holloways occupied the prime corner table in the exclusive lounge section, surrounded by shopping bags from luxury boutiques. Margaret was gesturing emphatically to a visibly uncomfortable server while William typed furiously on his phone. Valerie joined me, closing the door softly behind her. "They've ordered and sent back 3 rounds of drinks. Alejandro is ready to quit. They've been asking other customers if they're satisfied with the service, implying there are problems." "Where's Jonathan?" I asked, referring to our head barista, a national champion with a decade of experience. "I sent him home," Valerie admitted. "After Mr. Holloway lectured him about proper extraction techniques, She trailed off. "Nearly what?" "Nearly threw a portafilter at him." Despite everything, I almost smiled. Jonathan was the most even-tempered person I knew. For him to lose his composure, the provocation must have been exceptional. I watched as Margaret snapped her fingers to summon another server. The young woman approached with visible reluctance. "This is Camille's first week," Valerie murmured. "She's been in tears twice already." Through the glass, I observed as Margaret pointed to her empty water glass, saying something that made Camille's shoulders hunch. When the server left, William leaned over to another customer's table and said something that made the couple exchange glances and begin gathering their belongings. "They're driving away business," I said. "How long has this been going on?" "They've been coming in more frequently over the past month," Valerie admitted. "Usually once or twice a week. But today is by far the worst." I narrowed my eyes, thinking of the timing. Their escalating behavior at La Royale had begun shortly after their visit to Brewer's Nook. The coincidence seemed unlikely. "Do they know?" I asked suddenly. "About me?" Valerie shook her head. I've been careful. No one outside our inner circle knows you're the owner. As we watched, William summoned Valerie with an imperious gesture. She smoothed her expression and left to deal with them. Through the glass, I observed their interaction. William speaking forcefully, Margaret nodding in agreement, Valerie maintaining her professional composure despite the visible tension in her shoulders. When she returned, her lips were pressed in a thin line. They're insisting on meeting the owner. Mr. Holloway claims he wants to discuss investing in La Royale. He mentioned expansion opportunities and taking this quaint cafe to the next level. The audacity was breathtaking. My own father-in-law, attempting to muscle his way into my business while simultaneously belittling my other cafe. They're also demanding we ban the couple at table 7, Valerie added. Apparently, their child was making too much noise while using indoor voices to discuss a book. I'd seen enough. The Holloways had insulted my staff, driven away customers, threatened my business, and now were attempting to dictate who could patronize my cafe. Their behavior wasn't just rude, it was destructive. I'll handle this, I said, making my decision. Not as the owner, not yet. But this ends today. Valerie's eyes widened slightly. What are you going to do? I removed my Brewer's Nook apron and smoothed down my simple black dress. First, I'm going to serve them the best damn coffee they've ever had. Then I'm going to make sure they never treat my staff this way again. As I stepped out of the office, I knew the charade was approaching its finale. The Holloways had pushed too far, and it was time they learned exactly who owned the establishment they so proudly claimed to champion. I took a steadying breath before emerging onto the cafe floor. La Royale hummed with afternoon activity. The gentle clink of porcelain cups, the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of conversations between patrons who appreciated quality without needing to announce it. The Holloways hadn't noticed me yet. William was checking his watch with exaggerated impatience while Margaret scrutinized a dessert plate at a neighboring table with naked envy. They'd claimed the most visible corner of the cafe, as was their habit, a location that ensured they would be seen by everyone who mattered in their social circle. I approached the bar where Alejandro was preparing a pour-over, his movements precise despite the tension visible in his shoulders. I'll take over, I said quietly. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He'd only seen me at La Royale a handful of times, but he knew exactly who I was. Miss Carter, you don't have to. I want to, I assured him, tying a pristine La Royale apron around my waist. What's their usual order? Double ristretto for him. Bone-dry cappuccino for her, he replied, stepping aside with evident relief. I methodically prepared their drinks with a practiced precision that had once won me regional barista championships. Each movement was deliberate, from the careful tamping of the espresso to the microfoam that formed perfect peaks in the steaming pitcher. This wasn't just coffee, it was my statement, my art, my declaration of expertise. As I worked, I noticed the cafe had grown quieter. Regular customers recognized me, the mysterious figure who occasionally appeared to make adjustments to the menu or train new staff. Their curious glances followed me as I placed the finished drinks on a silver tray alongside 2 signature La Royale chocolate truffles. I caught Valerie's eye across the room and nodded slightly. She straightened, understanding passing between us as she moved to position herself near the entrance. Whatever happened next, she would manage the fallout. With deliberate steps, I crossed the cafe floor toward the Holloway's table. William was mid-complaint to a server about the background music being too avant-garde for proper coffee appreciation when he noticed me approaching. Finally, he muttered, dismissing the relieved server with a flick of his fingers. I hope these will be properly prepared. I set the drinks down with precision. 1 double ristretto and 1 bone-dry cappuccino, exactly as you prefer them. Margaret squinted at me, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. Do we know you? I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. You could say that. William, impatient as always, lifted his cup without bothering to acknowledge me further. He took a sip, then paused, surprise registering on his face. This is actually correct. Of course it is, I replied, remaining standing rather than retreating as a server would be expected to do. I made it exactly the way you like it. 26 seconds of extraction, water at 201 degrees. His brow furrowed. How did you know my preferences so precisely? The same way I know that Mrs. Holloway prefers her cappuccino with the foam so dry it stands up to a spoon, and that you both favor our Ethiopian Yirgacheffe beans over our Colombian blend. Margaret set her cup down slowly, scrutinizing my face. Who are you? Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the now hushed cafe. You've been some of our most vocal customers. I hope the service today is finally up to your standards. Recognition dawned in Margaret's eyes first. Sophia? What are you doing here? Did you actually take a job here after all? Her tone suggested this was both surprising and vaguely amusing, as though I'd finally admitted defeat. Not exactly, I replied. I removed my apron, folded it precisely, and draped it over my arm. I don't work at La Royale. At least, not in the way you think. William scoffed. Then what are you doing behind the counter? Playing barista here too. The cafe had gone completely silent now. Every eye was on our table, every ear tuned to our conversation. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch through the service window. I'm not playing anything, William. I straightened my shoulders. I founded La Royale. I own it. I created every blend you've praised, designed every aspect of the experience you claim to value so highly, and personally trained every barista you've criticized. The color drained from Margaret's face. That's not possible. It's entirely possible, Valerie interjected, stepping forward to stand beside me. Ms. Carter has been the owner and creative director of La Royale since its inception 5 years ago. I merely manage the day-to-day operations on her behalf. William's mouth opened and closed several times, his complexion shifting from pale to florid. But you own that little shop. Brewers, whatever. Brewer's Nook, I supplied calmly. Yes, I own that too. Different concepts, different markets, both mine. A ripple of whispers spread through the cafe as patrons leaned toward each other, processing this revelation. I recognized several members of Margaret's garden club among them, their expressions wavering between shock and barely concealed delight at the unfolding drama. All this time, I continued, my voice level, while you were insulting my cheap street corner business, while you were mocking my passion and suggesting I was embarrassing your son, you were simultaneously praising my work here. The coffee you called true luxury? My creation. The ambience you deemed sophisticated? My design. I lifted the cappuccino Margaret hadn't touched and took a deliberate sip. Perfectly made, don't you think? Though perhaps a touch too dry for my taste. Margaret found her voice at last. Why didn't you tell us? Why keep it a secret? At first, it was a simple experiment. Would you appreciate quality on its merits, or only when attached to status? Then, after witnessing your treatment of me as Daniel's wife, it became something else entirely. I set the cup down precisely. It became evidence. William's face contorted with anger. This is absurd. You've been deceiving us, making fools of us. No. I cut him off sharply. You've been making fools of yourselves. I simply provided the stage. I turned to address the entire cafe, my voice clear and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, I rarely make public appearances as the founder of La Royale, but today seemed an appropriate occasion. I gestured toward the Holloways. These customers have been causing disturbances in my establishment, berating my staff, and attempting to intimidate their way into special treatment. Margaret half rose from her seat. This is outrageous. We are loyal patrons. You are bullies, I corrected her firmly. And as of this moment, you are no longer welcome at La Royale. The shocked silence that followed was broken only by the sound of a single person beginning to applaud, quickly joined by others until the entire cafe was filled with the unmistakable sound of public approval. The applause eventually faded, leaving a charged silence in its wake. Margaret clutched her designer handbag like a shield, her knuckles white with tension. William's face had progressed through several shades of red to settle on a mottled purple. We were just joking, dear, Margaret stammered, her socialite composure cracking. You know how family teases one another. I raised an eyebrow. Teasing? Is that what you call it when you told my barista she was incompetent for not recognizing you immediately? Or when you threatened to contact the licensing board because we wouldn't create a special VIP program just for you? William forced a chuckle that sounded more like a wheeze. You're taking this all too seriously. We were merely offering constructive criticism. As experienced patrons, we have certain standards. Standards? I interrupted, my voice calm but unyielding. Let me tell you about standards, William. My standard is treating everyone with respect, whether they're serving you coffee or sitting next to you. My standard is recognizing quality based on merit, not price point or exclusivity. I turned to face the room, making eye contact with several regular customers who had endured the Holloway's behavior week after week. La Royale was never about elitism, I said. It was about excellence, about creating something beautiful and dignified that everyone could enjoy if they approached it with genuine appreciation rather than as a status symbol. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the cafe. From the corner of my eye, I saw Alejandro and the other staff watching with something like awe. For years, they had protected my privacy, endured difficult customers, and maintained the vision I had created, all while rarely seeing me take center stage. I returned my attention to the Holloways. For 3 years, I've listened to you belittle my work at Brewer's Nook. I've smiled politely while you suggested I was embarrassing your son with my little hobby. I've endured your backhanded compliments and outright insults. William shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Now, Sophia, perhaps we've occasionally been a bit harsh, but you weren't harsh, I said, cutting him off. You were cruel, and not just to me, to my staff, to other customers, to anyone you deemed beneath you. I leaned closer, lowering my voice, including your own son, who you believed had married beneath his station. Margaret's eyes widened. That's not true. We've always made it clear that Daniel could have done better. I finished for her. Always implied that his choice reflected poorly on him. Always treated me as though I were something to be tolerated rather than welcomed. I straightened up, brushing an invisible speck from my sleeve. The irony is, all this time you've been unconsciously celebrating my vision, my taste, my success. The cafe door opened, and Daniel walked in. He paused, taking in the scene, his parents shrinking in their seats, me standing tall before them, the entire room watching in riveted silence. Sophia, he called, confusion etched on his face as he approached. What's going on? You texted me to come to La Royale urgently. I reached for his hand as he joined us. I'm sorry for the dramatic summons, but it was time for your parents to learn the truth. I turned to him fully. I own La Royale, Daniel. I always have. To his credit, Daniel's surprise lasted only moments before understanding dawned in his eyes. He had always respected my independence, never questioned why I kept certain aspects of my professional life separate from our marriage. Now, the pieces were falling into place. That's why you never wanted to join us here, he said slowly. Why you always changed the subject when they praised it. I nodded. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. Part of me wanted to see how long it would take them to recognize quality without the validation of prestige. Daniel's expression hardened as he turned to his parents. And they failed that test spectacularly, didn't they? William attempted to salvage his dignity. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly ban us. We're your best customers. Actually, Valerie interjected, you're among our most difficult customers. And as Ms. Carter's representative, I can assure you that we value respect far more than we value your patronage. I squeezed Daniel's hand before letting go and addressing my staff directly. From this moment on, the Holloways are permanently banned from La Royale. We don't serve customers who treat people with disrespect. My gaze swept around the room. La Royale has always stood for quality, creativity, and community. Those values cannot coexist with entitlement and cruelty. I turned back to Margaret and William. I hope you'll reflect on that as you find somewhere else to get your coffee. Margaret made one last desperate attempt. Daniel, surely you won't let your wife speak to us this way? Daniel's laugh was genuine. Mother, I think it's clear that Sophia doesn't need my permission for anything. She never has. His eyes met mine with pride. She's built 2 successful businesses while enduring your constant criticism. I'd say she's earned the right to speak however she wishes. The Holloway's social humiliation was complete. Several of their society friends were present, witnessing their downfall, already whispering behind raised hands. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I untied my apron and handed it to Valerie. I'm taking the rest of the day off. The Nook needs me. I paused, then added with quiet authority, "See the Holloways out, please." As I walked toward the door, Daniel fell into step beside me. Behind us, I heard the unmistakable sounds of Margaret and William gathering their belongings, muttering excuses to familiar faces, their social currency rapidly devaluing with each passing second. Outside, the evening air felt fresh against my skin. I took a deep breath, savoring the sweet taste of dignity reclaimed. "You know they'll never forgive this," Daniel said softly. I smiled, slipping my hand into his. "I'm counting on it." From that day forward, they never dared look down on me again.